Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to syckpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Career Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba, and today Alan speaks with someone that, Alan, you've been close to this individual for many, many years. She's really good at getting employees to enjoy their jobs. What a great concept. She successfully combines business with psychology, and she's a big fan of Angela Bauer. And if you grew up in the 80s, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. More details on that to come. Her name is Bonnie Davis. Alan, anything you can add regarding what your listeners can expect to take away from this interview?
The one thing about Bonnie, in addition, is she once served as my career coach and gave me some very sage advice during my years at Facebook. So now I'm in the career coaching business as well, and it was just good to talk to her, someone who has really instructed me over my career.
All right. Well, let's get into the Sick Career Podcast with Bonnie Davis.
I'm really excited to have Bonnie Davis here on the Sick Podcast, the Steer Your Career by Kadima podcast. Bonnie and I know each other for almost a quarter century. She was dating, then engaged to, then married to one of my best buddies from college. And now, actually, probably over the last several years, as I've gotten into the recruiting and career coaching space, I probably speak to Bonnie a hell of a lot more than I do my buddy Seth. But Bonnie is a fabulous woman. She was also one of my former career coaches that I had myself. And she gave me some great advice during my time there, and we've remained good friends. So with that, love you to introduce yourself, Bonnie, to Acceleration Nation here.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. I am excited to be here. I am joining from Denver, Colorado. I've been living in Denver over 20 years, but I did grow up in New York, outside of New York City. And my work is all about helping make companies great places to work and helping leaders and teams be their best in those companies. So I have a master's in organizational psychology, started my career in consulting at Deloitte, switched to internal HR roles, mostly in high-tech companies. And about 10 years ago, made the leap to leave my last corporate gig to become a coach, consultant, and facilitator full-time. So I have two business partners. Our company is called HuWork, and we called it that because we're all about inspiring humans at work. And that's on the work front. On a personal note, you mentioned Seth, my husband. I'm married, and we have two teenage kids. And outside of work, Colorado has a lot of sunshine, and I love to be outdoors in the sunshine.
Very nice. What led you to pursue the path in industrial, like IO psychology and organizational design and things of that nature? I knew I wanted to study business when I was in college, but I had no idea what that would look like. So I don't know if you remember the TV show, I'm dating myself here, but from the 80s, Who's the Boss? There was this woman, Angela Bauer, and I didn't have a lot of role models. My parents didn't go to college. I didn't have a lot of role models in my life. I had a blue collar surroundings. And so Angela was this she wore power suits, she commuted to Manhattan, and that just seemed really cool. But I had no idea what I wanted to do with business. So I was a business major at American University, switched. Then I took psychology classes, loved them. So I added psychology, and through some research, I discovered that there's this thing called organizational psychology. I had this gut feeling that I could combine business and psychology, but didn't quite know what that looked like. So once it had a name, I was really excited, went immediately to grad school for it because I had no idea what kind of job to get. And then, of course, at grad school was the start of my networking and meeting people who were in the field. And I started getting a sense of what a job might look like. Nice. So you were inspired by Angela Bauer on Who's the Boss.
I was actually inspired by Dr. Jason Seaver from Growing Pains. I was like, hey, that guy has a great job. He's working at home. He sees people. And that was one of the big inspirations why I went for my PhD in psychology, which that inspiration only lasted for one semester before I withdrew. But
that's okay. And definitely same era of TV that we grew up on.
I think they were both on ABC. I think maybe even on the same nights.
You could be right. That's a little beyond my memory bank. But yeah, it is amazing how we all have role models and you never know where they come from.
Yeah. And you generally consult with leaders at companies now, or organizations, or combination of those?
Combination. I think one of the things that works for me being an entrepreneur is that the part I don't love is the business development. And so I do have 2 relationships where I subcontract to 2 larger firms that give me a lot of coaching work. So I get mass amounts of coaching clients from big companies like Facebook and Apple, and I don't have to do the business development. So sure, those companies that I subcontract to keep a portion of the fees, but it's well worth it to me because I get to do the work that I love. I don't have to deal with a lot of the invoicing and the administrative stuff. And in addition to that, though, I also sometimes get independent clients that come my way, and either people who are doing it more on a personal note and they're paying out of pocket, or sometimes it's their company paying. So for me, while I've spent a lot of my coaching time in high tech and more of my internal experience there, my impact, I think, crosses really any kind of function, any kind of industry.
So you've done a decent amount of work with Facebook and Apple, and like I know you were also at Sun, which, for those that don't remember, Sun,
Oracle,
yeah, and I think the Sun sign in Menlo Park is on the back of Facebook sign.
That is correct. That was a Sun campus, and yes, it's a good. I've been told it's left there as a memory of what can happen to companies that go the route of Sun, and they were well beyond their glory days. But it was an amazing place to work, and I think for me, one of the things I'm most grateful for is that was the foundation for building my own business, quite honestly, because those friends of mine over the years. And we got married at the same time. We had babies at the same time. A lot of them are now heads of HR or in other influential roles. And they're like, hey, we did this together all those years ago. Come do it for me as an outside consultant or coach or facilitator. So I'm very thankful for those days at Sun, which, yes, is now the Facebook campus.
As you work predominantly with those 2 big tech players, Facebook and Apple, do you notice anything different culturally from them? Or is it similar sort of challenges that leaders have and people have there?
I think it's a lot of similarity in terms of both are very high performing, high expectations, super smart, as you know, from being inside some of those companies. So that piece of it has the similarity. Culturally, I would say that Facebook seems to be more managers that are younger and less experienced. So I just think that it's a combination of Facebook being a younger company in terms of how long it's been around, but also seeming to promote people more quickly into management positions. So I wound up with more managers who have less experience, but I love that. To me, one of the biggest transitions in somebody's career is becoming a people manager for the first time. And I think that there's not enough training or recognition on what a hard period of time that is. So it's super rewarding for me to get to help people earlier in their career. And my coaching is across the board. I could have people who are CEOs and working for 30 years, but a lot of it is that early career or even that mid-level haven't quite made it to the senior ranks, like to the executive ranks, but they're high potential and they're on that track.
As you coach some newer managers, going from an IC to a manager, do you think people are often making the choice because of desire to lead? Or is it like there's definitely a time sometimes where people hit a ceiling of like, hey, if I want to keep advancing in the organization, I need to manage. Talk a little bit about the mindset of people of when they go into management. How often is it by their choice or almost like obligation to get to a higher level in your career?
Yeah, it's a great choice. I don't have the data on that. My gut instinct is going to tell me that it's a good 60 to 80% that feel that social obligation, that you get to a point that that's what you do. You work hard and you become the boss one day. And especially with engineers, and this is across the board. Even my mom is a retired nurse, and she got the promotion to management. And she's like, wait a minute, I don't do nursing anymore. I deal with schedules and discipline issues and all kinds of garbage. With engineers, a lot of the fun stuff of solving juicy problems, they're like, wait, hang on, I need to coach and mentor other people to do that. I need to remove barriers. I need to influence. So one of the hardest things is that your work becomes a lot less tangible when you become a people manager. That sense of reward of like a job well done, I can touch and feel what I did. You don't really have that so much in a lot of the management roles. So back to your question, yes, a lot of people feel that sense of, if I'm going to keep being successful in this company, and quite frankly, a peer pressure, I'm watching my peers get promoted, I too should be doing that. And it is a very difficult transition. And I said it's 60, 80%. There is that percentage of people who do love it. And I think you were like this, they do feel really rewarded and just that sense of energy and really love of managing and coaching people and watching people grow and blossom and thrive. But it's not for everyone. And a lot of people, there's sort of this assumption, like if you've been watching your own bosses do this job your whole career, you're going to know what you're doing. And there's so much behind the scenes that it's like, nobody ever told me, like, everything from writing performance reviews to dealing with difficult employee challenges, making a lot of decisions that are behind the scenes. So a lot of people don't realize what they're signing up for. And even though they think they want it, once they're in it, they're like, whoa, this is not quite the right fit.
Yeah, there is a lot of bullshit and paperwork that has to occur, which I think does not always lead to better management. Like, you do have to write the performance reviews. You do have to put people on PIPs, performance improvement plans, and things like that. But that is grueling, and that is like the unexciting part of leadership.
It is. And so therefore you have to also find the stuff that rewards you and fulfills you to make up for that. When in a first coaching session, amongst the questions that I ask to get to know my clients are, what most energizes you about your job? What do you love most about it? And what are the things that drag you down that you don't love? And almost every single people manager mentions the stuff that you just said as the stuff that they like the least.
Yeah. And you talk a little bit about the strengths and what invigorates people. And I know you're a big fan of Marcus Buckingham, is strength-based leadership. Can you explain to our listeners a little bit about that and the philosophy behind it?
Yeah, happy to. So one of the hats I wear, I mentioned that I have some subcontracting relationships. So one of them is with the Marcus Buckingham Company. And if you want to go onto marcusbuckingham.com, his standout assessment is free. He's giving it the gift of standout. It used to be the purchase of the book. So you can go ahead and get more clarity on your own strengths. And Marcus was really the founder of this field when he was at the Gallup organization. And most of us grow up being told, you got to do better, you got to do more. If we came home from school with grades, if we had 4 A's and 1 C, let me ask you, Alan, what did your parents ask you about? You had 4 A's and 1 C. What did your parents say to your report card?
What the fuck happened with that C? No, well, my mom might have used that profanity.
Instead of going, you've been getting straight A's in math all these years. I see you love math. Let's talk about what opportunities you have to use those math skills some more. So, and then you get to the workplace and it's the same thing. Your performance reviews are usually more focused on what you're not doing right instead of what you're doing well. And so the research shows that across the board, employee engagement, customer satisfaction, profitability, productivity are going to be better when you spend more of your day focusing on your strengths. And the things that you want to avoid, like absenteeism, even accidents in a factory environment, are going to be improved if you're using your strengths. And intuitively, I think we get it. If you think about when you're doing the work you love, you have that energy. Sometimes before you feel you're doing it, you're excited to go into it. When you're doing it, you're like in the zone and you're just the flow. You don't want to stop. You don't want to take that break. And even sometimes after, you still feel that buzz. And compare that feeling to when you're working on the stuff that you're bad at and that's hard for you. It's so much more draining and exhausting. So the idea is that you want to spend more of your day doing the stuff that you love. And the message is not ignore your weaknesses. I am a geek. I love developing. I love learning. And most of us need to learn and grow in our jobs because we just wouldn't get promoted. We probably wouldn't be successful. So it's not about ignoring the hard stuff. It's just asking yourself, how much of my day am I spending? Am I clear on my strengths? Or am I doing work that's, let's say, 60 to 80% of the day in my strength zone?
That's interesting. And that's how I advise my clients too. So with the growth formula that we use is like identify your goals. The second piece is realistically assess your strengths. Because if you don't know as you're looking to get a job, a company is going to hire you based on your strengths and your experience, not what you want to do, but what you've actually done. Ideally, what they're doing is aligned with what they're strong at. But how has that informed your conversations with individuals where sometimes you might see a disconnect with their strengths versus what they're doing?
Well, sometimes you can apply what's called the strengths lens to make the hard stuff a little bit easier. So as an example, I have a client I worked with recently who presentation skills is really hard. Very common thing that a lot of people just get really nervous and not comfortable doing presentations. Well, in the standout, one of the top, and it's based on top 9 roles, one of the top 9 roles is to be a connector. And that actually happens to be my top role. I'm a connector provider, to use the language of standout. And so as we did a coaching session, this person realized that she has such a joy over connecting people to information and that was the essence of her presentation. So instead of feeling like she had to be the expert on the stage who sounded brilliant, she was there as a connector, connecting somebody else to information that would be really useful for them. And that was in her strength zone and that fulfilled her. So when she shifted the narrative in her head of like, instead of going, I'm bad at presentations, because we all have these things that we tell ourselves, these limiting beliefs, and realized I'm great at connecting people to information, that was one way to help her just not only get calmer about presentations, but really get excited that she was really making an impact and helping people.
How do you know when to? So this was a situation where someone had to improve on their presentation skills for their role, and it became better. How do you help guide people of when to focus on brushing up some of their weaknesses or the areas that they're less comfortable with versus investing more in their strengths?
Yeah. And of course, the answer is it's both. So whatever you tell me, so as a strengths-based coach, whatever you want to work on, if you said to me, really struggling with delegating to my team, the first thing I would say is tell me about what you do well so that you can tap into that. So I wouldn't say, okay, we're going to give you all the tips and tools on how to improve delegation. I would first start with, what do you do well? And sometimes the doing well is simply, I really get along well with my team. That's a great baseline. Sometimes it's a long list of strengths that can help you do better. And sometimes it's just 1 or 2 things. From there, I say, great. And now what's hard about delegation for you? And you may say things like, it's just really hard for me to let go. Or, it'll be quicker if I do it myself instead of taking the time to tell them what to do. Or I get really nervous that if they mess up, it's going to reflect badly on me. Okay, we can talk through those and I'll have tips and ideas and ways to overcome the things that are difficult. But it's always going to be from the foundation of leaning into and really being intentional about your strengths. Because if you only work on the hard stuff, it's going to be exhausting. And frankly, you may actually never get better without doing both. Being clear about the strengths to leverage and then being clear about the new things to try.
Oh, Are most of your clients managers that you coach?
They are. Yeah, I do sometimes have individual contributors. My ICs are usually more often in HR where they're like sponsoring programs. So they want to understand what it feels like to be coached, but most are managing people.
And what are some of the common challenges that managers face? And I think this is valuable because everybody who is being managed looks at their manager and they may not understand what their challenges are that they're dealing with. And these people are coming to you maybe by choice, maybe as instructed by their leadership. There's probably and I'm guessing you have very different outcomes when someone goes to you by choice versus being told to go to you by leadership. But what are some common challenges that managers have that would be helpful for someone reporting into that manager to have that insight and understanding? You don't need to reveal people specifically, but like knowing that my manager is going through certain challenges could help me understand how to be potentially a more effective employee to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is many managers need to manage up. So they need to figure out their relationship with their own manager. And then of course, I'm reporting to you and you're struggling with your own manager, I'm going to feel the downfall of that, the downstream effects of that. So sometimes it's just having a little bit of compassion to understand that your manager may be stuck in the middle and that some of the decisions that they are making they're out of their control. Essentially, a lot of people that I work with are in the middle and they have a bunch of layers of bosses above them. You've experienced that in your own career and their hands are kind of tied, especially so many companies when it comes to promotions is a great example. They really want to promote their people, but their hands are tied because there's only a certain number of promotions they can do per year or within their overall work group. It's not just their team, but their boss has 8 direct reports and there's only so much across those 8 direct reports. So I would say that realizing that your manager has to manage up just like you do is probably the number one thing.
That's a good point. Unless you're coaching Zuckerberg or Tim Cook, I'm assuming you're always coaching essentially middle managers.
Yeah, and even Zuckerberg and Tim Cook have a board to report to and a board to deal with.
Zuckerberg, I'm not sure, but Tim Cook does.
No comment. But yes, pretty much in life, we all have a boss. Yes, and if not, all kidding aside, stakeholders, customers, other people who are dependent on us and where our decisions. I tell my clients that ultimately your job is to balance. You're juggling 3 balls all the time. You need to manage the business, manage your team, and manage individuals. And you don't want to over-rotate on any one of those. So when COVID started, by design, by need, a lot of us over-rotated on the individual piece. Are people okay? Do they have a chair at home? Are their family safe? And therefore, leading the business came a little bit as a lower priority. And that was okay. That's what was needed. But if they spent the entirety of 2020 focusing more on their individuals than on team needs and business needs, their business would have failed and nobody would have had a job. So it's over time, mostly juggling those 3, knowing that you could be in a huge timeline. And all of a sudden for a month, it's all about the business and the team piece and the individual piece falls to the side. But generally over time, are you managing those 3 buckets? And are you doing it well is really what it comes down to.
Typically, when you are coaching people, it's often, I guess, paid by the company, not by the individual.
Yes.
Are there times that you think that you should advise someone to potentially, like maybe they're not achieving their goal within the company? Since you're being employed by the company, it might put you in a difficult spot to advise them of, hey, maybe you can move up in your career here. You're getting the writing on the wall. And like, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it is a tricky one. Ultimately, most companies want what's for the best for the person. If you have a person there I think it's understood that you're just often just going for the best results for everybody. And yes, sometimes that happens. I had pretty early as a coach, a client who on her 360-degree assessment realized that the things that were like her top 10 that she was really great at were very against the culture of this company. And she read this 360 and she had this light bulb, this aha moment. She's like, no wonder I don't feel successful here. The things that I'm great at are not valued here. And the things that I'm not great at are what this company most wants. And she had this data to prove it. And she resigned not long after. And it was the best for everybody. Sometimes my guidance is more helping them have a difficult conversation with their boss. So I'm not really in a position to say, usually, sure, sometimes eventually I will say, have you thought about if this is the right fit for you? And I'll just give them those powerful questions for them to come to there. And sometimes the coaching is more about having a courageous conversation with their manager to really figure out a better outcome.
What are so there's challenges of managing up, managing down. I find more managers to focus more of their attention on managing up versus down. Mm-hmm. I've actually found myself to do the reverse, and it has not served me well necessarily from a job security perspective. From like, I sleep well at night, but what other challenges do you see occur often besides like if you had the 80-20 rule of like 20% of the issues that impact 80% of your customers that they're dealing with, are there other things besides the managing up down dichotomy? Are there other challenges that you typically see?
I see a lot of executive presence and confidence, people who need to be in meetings with, a lot of people do just fine with their own team, but then they're in with more senior leaders. And that really they feel like they can't find their voice. So a lot of what I do in there is having them get clear on their point of view, what is important to you so that you can clearly articulate it. Sometimes it's more about the hesitation words, the fillers, the ums, the uhs, the not sounding nervous, using power words, using certain phrases. So there are ways to both overcome the mental anxiety over the confidence, but also certain tips and tools to use in the moment. So executive presence is one. Next most common is difficult conversations, performance related, talking to a peer that's not delivering. It's so many difficult, talking to a customer. I have a workshop. I have an article. I have a ton of work I do around difficult conversations. And the third one right now is setting boundaries, healthy habits, well-being, this whole culture of overwork that's only gotten worse with so many people working at home and not having the time to leave the desk, get on a subway or in a car, go home and be clear about what happens at home and what happens at work.
Yeah. The difficult conversations particularly interesting to me because I also agree that not enough difficult conversations are being had in the workplace. And even though when I worked at Facebook, I think they had posters all over the place about difficult conversations and training on that. And I found that actually the culture that had the least of them. So it was interesting. That was just my perspective there. But if those difficult conversations are not occurring, because you're going in there to help people have these difficult, direct conversations, what makes a conversation difficult? And knowing that, well, first, let's answer that. Like, what do you think makes conversations difficult for people to initiate them?
Well, ironically, what makes it difficult is that they've labeled it difficult in their mind. So if I need to give somebody a performance feedback to say that they're not cutting it, I will ask them, what makes this hard for you? And the difficult thing is, well, they're making assumptions. Well, the person's going to get angry at me. They're going to get defensive. They're not going to want to hear it. And I'll say to them, well, if you had a performance thing going on, would you rather know so that you can fix it or not know so that you can be protected from hearing bad news? And everybody says, I'd rather know. Nobody wants to be surprised at performance review time. Nobody wants to be continually screwing up and messing up their brand if they could have fixed that. So immediately the mindset shifts of like, I'm doing them a favor. I'm as the key is having a good intention. If your intention is, I care about you, I want you to improve, boom, there you have it. All of a sudden, it's not a difficult conversation. It's just a problem solving. We're going to collaborate and we're going to help figure this out together instead of I'm right, you're wrong. I'm the boss, you're the employee. We set up these me versus you dynamics and we don't need to, instead of thinking about the positive nature of it. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is just that we're conflict averse humans generally. I mean, I know I am. And most of us just, it doesn't feel good to be direct and address things with other people. And then some people address them just fine, but it's not effective. So they're doing things to trigger people's fight or flight. They're saying things that they don't realize, but they're saying things that people feel unsafe. Even me saying to you, hey, Alan, I have some feedback for you. What does that do for you in the moment when I say that?
Right now, I'm a little bit concerned. I was like, you're going to tell me like how I'm fucking up here on my podcast?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, all I did was say, hey, I have some feedback for you.
I assume it's negative. It could be positive.
It could be, right? I didn't say anything bad, but it triggers your brain. Your brain in the moment, your fight or flight, you did not have any control over that. Your fight or flight instinct triggers, and your brain is going, I'm unsafe, I'm unsafe, I'm unsafe. Whether a bear in the woods wants to chop your head off or your manager has something that's hard to hear, your brain is very ancient, there to protect you, and you're going to get into fight or flight mode. So part of what I do is also, how do you even start the conversation so that people don't get into fight or flight mode and people feel more supported and like their manager really cares.
And I've seen the hesitation to have direct conversation. I actually got rejected from a job once because I said, I'm very direct. I just tell it as it is. And I was told, well, we don't like that culture here. It's like, okay, it's probably better that I found that out soon enough. And I think you talked a little bit about nobody likes to get surprised during performance review, but a lot of people do get surprised during performance feedback review. So how can an individual, realizing that they may not be getting the truth, or even if they are getting the truth, it is so watered down that it's easy for them to ignore it. How can an individual make sure that they are getting the feedback that they need to know so that they're not getting surprised come performance review time?
Yeah. I think the secret is in the kind of questions that you ask. So a lot of the work I do is helping people ask better questions. Quite simply, better questions bring better conversations. And there's actually been a whole bunch of books on this exact topic. How do you ask really good questions? You can Google search for powerful questions, and there's a ton. You asked me, hey, how am I doing? I'm probably going to be pretty generic. If instead you ask me something more pointed, like, hey, what are the 3 things I'm doing really well, and what are 3 things I should be doing differently? Or what can I do for an even bigger impact? Or when you think about my trajectory and my potential here, what should I be doing to make sure that I reach that potential? So being more specific in the questions will hopefully, and I'll put force in air quotes, but force the person to be more thoughtful and specific in the way they answer the question.
That's some sick advice there, Bonnie. I told you I was, yeah. And I've done something similar. I haven't used those questions, but I do like those. I try to ask people, what should I start doing? And then I pause there. And then what should I stop doing that's not working for you? And then what should I continue doing? That one usually gets the least valuable information, but the stop and the start I find to be very helpful.
Yeah. Start, stop, continue is a great framework. If you want to shorten it into 2 instead of 3, helping, hindering is another framework. What's helping my success? What's hindering my success? And another thing you can do is if your company has what's often called a competency model, some sort of framework that says this is what it takes to be successful here, then print it out and bring it in and maybe even ask them, like, high, medium, and low, scale of 1 to 5. Even if your company doesn't formally have those kind of assessments, ask for it verbally. If your company does not, then go Google something like list of what the best managers do. And you can either take that list face value or just pick the 6 things that are most important to you. Because the more we have specific data, the more we have specific things to respond to, the more specific we'll get in response from others.
Yeah. Going back to the strength-based model, where a lot of companies talk about that, but a lot of times on the feedback, the focus could be on the AFDs. We called it at Google, areas for development, which I think they took that from McKinsey. How often do you see that companies really focus on the strength-based versus I've seen a lot of instances myself where people get punished for the weaknesses, and rather than a thoughtful approach from management of seeing, okay, where are they strong at, and then how do we get them into there? I see that as pretty rare. I think it's a good thing for people to have a strength-based leadership, but if that's not like, if you agree with me that that's not common, how should an individual navigate that space if they're not going to be necessarily directed into their strengths, but they have to almost own it on their own?
Yeah. I think you just nailed it. Owning it on your own, and maybe even being bold and saying to your manager, hey, I just did this assessment. It's a free assessment to figure out what my strengths are. And wouldn't it be cool if the whole team did it and we can have a conversation and we can compare notes so we can all understand each other's strengths and we can tap into each other? That's a definitely a more bold conversation, because if it's a culture that really is not going to embrace that, your manager may think you're either a little crazy or just trying to push your own agenda. But I would say beyond that, it's really up to us to drive the visibility for our successes. And so just to make sure a lot of things that we do well are invisible to our managers. And so put it on you to just share. And I think there's nothing wrong with this during one-on-ones or other opportunities. In addition to often we come with, these are the problems, this is where I need your help, these are the decisions, and the conversation with, and I just want to share, here's a few wins from this past week that I'm really proud of. And there's nothing wrong with you owning that visibility.
You coach predominantly more senior leaders than junior leaders. Is it?
Well, it's a good mix.
Yeah. What about the mix of men versus women? Is it safe for me to assume, because you're dealing with leaders, more senior leaders, that it might be a higher mix of men versus women, or is that?
You're right about the mix, but it's more because it's engineering versus the level. Okay. So as you've seen in tech, there's just a higher percentage of men that are generally in tech than women.
So you're focused more on the engineering side at both those companies?
A lot of it. And I work with Indeed and some other companies, and I work with some non-tech companies as well. But across the board, because it is a lot of high tech, then yes, I do see more men than women.
Engineering managers, the engineering occupation is more of, I find, a black and white sort of operation. Like, you've checked in this many lines of code, and there's more structured promotion processes often. Do you see that as well, or is that just a bad stereotype that I have?
No, it's there. It's there. Yeah. When I was at Sun a long time ago, I was responsible for creating a performance management system. It was the beginning of what's called rank and yank. Sometimes the forced bottom 10%, and then they're supposed to be managed out. And I had a team that I was leading with employees so that it was they were representative of the 40,000 people that this would be rolled out to. And in the rating system, I think it was like a 1 through 5, and the engineers really wanted like a 4.2. Like, they were really pushing me. And I said, this is human behavior. There is no way of calibrating and telling me like how this employee is a 4.2 and that employee is a 4.4. It's just like human behavior is not precise enough. But in their world, everything had to have that precision. And it was just some very funny conversations with that black and white nature that you're talking about with engineers.
Well, Google used to have a 41-point performance rating scale from like 0.0 to 4.0. And we would get into debates during calibration if someone's a 3.3 or a 3.4.
Yeah.
Like how the
we're not robots. There's just, and we're talking about a whole year of your life. Think of how many things happened in a year that manager isn't even remembering to calibrate. It's a different subject for a different day, but more companies are eliminating ratings and just going on the conversation. And I think that's a healthier place to go.
That's interesting. I think there's pros and cons, and that could be a whole nother episode about performance ratings.
It could be, but it's becoming more popular. Still not the norm, but every year a little bit more companies are doing it.
Yeah. Well, great, Bonnie. We're running low on time, so I always like to end the Sick podcast with 2 questions of my guests. The first one is, what sick trick or like career hack or advice that you've given to people that you find particularly valuable would you like to share with Acceleration Nation out there?
What's coming to mind for me is overuse LinkedIn as a way to keep in touch with people. I'm amazed at how many people, hey, we worked together all those years ago, and they find me and they reach out. Or, oh, I've really been enjoying those articles you've been posting. I have some work that I want you to do. We meet a lot of people in our lives, and why let those relationships go to waste when you have one-stop shop to keep in touch and for people to find you?
Now I got to go talk to LinkedIn about sponsoring my show.
There you go, for sure. Tell them I sent you.
And on that note, this might be a preview. If people want to reach out to you and connect with you, where's the best way that people can find you?
Obviously, LinkedIn. Please do reach out. I want to practice what I preach. Bonnie Davis 01 is how I come up in terms of the full URL, but also my company's website, HuWorkTeam.com. And right on our cover page is a link to an assessment that we have, also a free assessment called the Human Factor Assessment. And it's a great way to understand the strengths and areas for development, not so much of you individually, but of overall your company and some of the practices around being a human organization and treating people well. So go for it, take the assessment, and you can also reach out there. We have a contact us form, or feel free to message me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And for folks that missed that, it's HuWork team.com. HuWorkTeam.com.
And is the last part of that. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. You got it.
Awesome, Bonnie. Well, I always appreciate our conversations. Say hi to your husband for me.
I will do that. Say hi to your family too, Alan.
I'm looking forward to celebrating your daughter's bat mitzvah in a couple of months. And it's always great catching up. And thanks for the great wisdom you've shared.
Appreciate it. Take care.
All right. Once again, you can find her on LinkedIn as Bonnie Davis 01. That's 01. Special thanks to Bonnie for hanging out with Alan today. If you like this podcast, be sure to follow, subscribe, and all that good stuff. You can always connect with Alan at sickpodcast.com to get started on steering your career with Kadima. Once again, that's SYCK podcast.com. Alan, anything to add before we wrap this episode?
Just when you go to sickpodcast.com, sign up for our newsletter. Bonnie's dog, whose name is Ari, was once featured in there. Oh. So besides seeing some cute pets sometimes in our accelerator, you'll find lots of great career advice. Learn what's going on with Kadima and learn how to take control of your career.
All right, awesome. Once again, that's sickpodcast.com, SYCK. For Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba. We hope you've enjoyed this episode with Bonnie, and you're going to love the next one.